And we're live. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
It's been a while since we've said that.
Yeah,
Welcome to Mike and Lauren live.
Yes.
Wow. What has this been?
I meant to look up how long it's been since the last one, and I completely forgot today.
It's been a
while.
At least a year and a half, I think. So we are very excited today because last week we launched our long time in the making stock series videos with Jim Collins, and we're just really excited to have him on the air with us tonight to answer some questions about his new book, The Simple Path to Wealth, about the first video in that series, and just any other questions and answers you might have for us or Jim. So without further ado, let's invite Jim. Jim, welcome. You are live on the air.
Thank you, guys. It's an honor to be with you, particularly seeing as this is your return to broadcasting.
Yeah. Actually, were you our last live show? Jim Collins. One of the last few was Jim Collins thinks your house is a bad investment. So
that brought it to an end, and I was about to take credit for bringing it back.
Yeah, exactly. So first of all, thank you for actually making it, because people don't know this was down to the minute. You had lost your internet connection, right?
It was down to the wire. A few hours ago, I was working on the computer, and suddenly I didn't have any internet. And usually that's just a matter of rebooting the computer and unplugging the modem. But this time it turned out that there was an outage where we live. And when we called, they said, oh yeah, we're aware of the problem. We're working on it. And we should have your internet back up by 7 tonight. Well, that of course wouldn't have worked. And I was in a panic because I didn't know how to reach you. And fortunately, from when we got together in Wisconsin 2 years ago, my wife Jane had your phone number, and I was able to call you and give you a heads up. But they got back up sooner than we expected. Let's hope it's reliable.
So if there is an outage, there's your answer why Jim will have lost internet. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So you're back in 2014 when we filmed these videos. The plan was we were going to make these 12 or 10 videos about your now famous blog posts, blog articles called the Stock Series. And then you were also working on a book at the time, and we were going to try and do them together. And then we ended up procrastinating quite a bit on putting them together. And then for you, tell us about the book writing experience. So that ended up taking longer than you expected, I suppose, right?
Well, your procrastination turned out to work out very well, because the book in that summer when we shot the video, I thought the book was going to be out in 4 or 5 months. It shows how naive I was in the process, and here it is 2 years later. But it turned out to be a much more lengthy and arduous process than I would have guessed. But I'm pleased with the result, and the timing worked out well with what was going on for you too. So here we are.
Yes, and so for the people that don't know, our video series is based on those blog articles and now his book. So let's throw it right out there right off the bat. Yes.
First, if you've not done a live event with YouTube, though, there is a little chat section off to the right. So please write comments. That's what I'm doing here. I'm not just ignoring you. So
yes.
Please comment, ask questions, and
the Q&A part of the live Q&A. If you go on your video player, it's on the right-hand side. So right off the bat, the reviews of this first video, I would have to say, are mixed. And I think that came down to the title. And let us know in the comments if that's what it was, because I'm curious, if just our viewership has shifted away from financial type of videos and you just weren't expecting that kind of video, or if there's a major market crash coming, clickbaity title is what resulted in kind of the negative feedback, which is kind of funny because it never crossed my mind that was a clickbaity title, because I'd been working with that title of yours, Jim, for 2 years, and it just never crossed my mind.
Well, I saw that. I didn't, the few comments that I saw, and I looked at it pretty early on, so there are probably some now that I've missed. But I did see a couple of the ones about the title being clickbait. And I felt bad because I knew that you had picked up the title from me, from my blog post. And for what it's worth, it was never intended then to be clickbait. It was more my attempt at a sarcastic, a bit of sarcasm about how the media goes nuts whenever the market takes a a periodic plunge, which it does on a regular basis and which is part of the process. So I was meaning it not in a clickbaity sort of way, even for the original post, but more as our sarcastic, can you believe these people get all up and worried about this stuff when they should know by now that it's a natural part of the process. But I can see where somebody who had no frame of reference and just saw the title and then the video would kind of feel that way.
And that's what it seems like here. Some people are commenting that if they had not known about our finance videos or known more about us, then they would have thought that it was clickbait. But because they knew it was coming, then they were expecting it.
And my guess is the people who took it as clickbait are probably ones who didn't know your videos that well and perhaps don't know about my writing and what have you. So hopefully they'll feel more comfortable if they're listening as we go on.
Yes. So there's the title. The topic was, market volatility, and that most people, lose money in the stock market because the inevitable crash is coming, and then they sell when the market is down and then wait for the recovery. So let's talk a little bit tonight about market volatility, and then we'll just open it up to general questions and answers. But I heard a lot of response, even one person put it, the only way the market's going to keep going up forever is if it's your hopes and dreams. A lot of people talked about the Fed needing to pump money in for the market to continue to go up. Some people mentioned that there must surely be a limit on growth. And I think they're talking a lot about just natural resources are eventually going to limit our economic growth. Have you done any reading on that subject or have any thoughts on can the market really always go up?
Well, you covered a lot of ground in that comment, and I think that in your video you actually cover it very well. What I would say is I haven't researched all of the things that you mentioned, but as you point out in the video, I have been investing for 40 plus years, and there's never been a time during that 40 plus years when people weren't saying basically the same thing, that the market can't go higher from here, that we've reached the top, that there is no more room for growth. And they may have been saying it for different reasons, but for reasons that they felt at the time were every bit as compelling. And I would point out that during the last 40 years, there were a lot of challenges. I mean, you had and you went through them in the video, so maybe I won't go through them now. Anybody who's listening and hasn't watched the video can see them, but it was not some golden, easy period of time for the market to rise. It was a time fraught with challenges and difficulties and inflation and wars and what have you. And yet, as I was doing the research for the book, from 1975 to the end of 2015, the market went up just shy of 12%. Now, let me interject here immediately. I'm not suggesting that anybody plan on it continuing to go up for the next 40 years at 12%. But the point I'm making is in spite of an enormous array of challenges over the last 40 years, the market did grind relentlessly up. And if you look at the last century, and Warren Buffett makes this point, where you had 2 world wars, a Great Depression, any number of lesser evils to contend with, in that century, it went from something on the order of 650 to 11,050. So there's a lot of evidence to indicate that the market does continually to grind upwards. If someday the United States ceases to be a viable country with a viable economy, then yeah, maybe the game's over. But at that point, it won't make any difference what you did with your money.
And that's what my point is. Even when I'm confronted with things that maybe I haven't read, certain books on whatever people throw at me, any sort of doomsday type thing. But at the end of the day, I can't think of a scenario. And if you can, and you're in the comments, let me know, because I would like to be open-minded about it. But I can't think of a scenario where you would be better off by not investing. If it gets to the point where it can't go up anymore, the dollar is going to be worthless. Like if you really believe that, then start investing in guns and food, I guess, because what better opportunity do you have than the stock market to invest your money? Is what I'm trying to say. So you keep it under your mattress, it's going to be worthless. Or you invest it, maybe you'll have something left if, say the growth is limited and, the market crashes by 50% and never recovers. Wouldn't you be better off having what growth you did have?
I think you make a great point, and I'm basically an optimist, and I'm in pretty good company in being an optimist. Warren Buffett is an optimist. Jack Bogle is an optimist. But I realize not everybody is. And if you're not, you have to look at it and say, well, if I envision a much grimmer future, then what is the alternative? And I agree with you that as long as we have a viable country, a viable economy, the stock market may not do as well as it's done in the last 40 years or in the last 140 years, but you will be better off by virtue of having invested than by not having invested. Now, if everything does swirl down the drain, then it's not going to matter. And at that point, maybe you should be stockpiling canned goods and firearms. And if that's your worldview, I'm not going to persuade you otherwise. And that's your worldview, and you should make your future and investing decisions accordingly. I'm not trying to persuade anybody of anything. I'm just basically writing for my daughter about what's worked for me, what's kicked me in the ass, and what I think is going to work for her over the next 80 years if she has a nice long lifespan to 100 years as lifespans are expanding, and what I anticipate will continue to work for the rest of us.
And are you an optimist in that sense, just like you said? So population is growing and life expectancy is growing. Are you an optimist that we will come up with, alternatives to food supply and energy shortages and all of that, and it'll just pan out and as it always has in the past? In your experience, have people been saying this all the way along, or is this time a little different? Do you actually feel this time is a little bit different? Not the stock market necessarily, just the global economy and just overpopulation in general.
I really don't, and let me begin by saying I'm not an expert. I'm not a futurist, and I'm not an expert in all of those technologies. But there was a book written in the early 70s about the dramatic projected rise of population and the food supply not keeping up, and was projecting massive wars and starvation and what have you that didn't come to pass. And part of it is that the food production didn't keep up, and most of the instances of starvation that we've seen in the past decades are not a matter of food production, they're a matter of food delivery. I was reading an article very recently about how much produce Canada is shipping down to the US, and things like tomatoes. And when you think of Canada and as far north as they are, you don't typically think of them as being a producer of things like tomatoes or the kinds of produce that California is famous for. But what they've done is they've built vast greenhouses. And because they're doing this in a controlled environment, it's a much more efficient and productive crop generation for the amount of space that's needed. Recently I saw another article about high-rise plantings and crops. So I think there's creativity of humans and the technology that they come up with is nothing short of amazing. And the other thing that I would point out is that the population does seem to be leveling off. The projections that I've seen is I think we're at 7.5 billion. It's going to hit 9 billion and then level off and maybe even drop down. And you do see that as populations become more prosperous, they have fewer children. And as the world becomes more prosperous, and the truth is that while there's still desperate poverty in the world, there is less of it than at any other time in history, certainly in modern history. And that seems to be a trend that's going to continue, and populations are dropping. And sometimes that's in Europe, for instance, that's causing a bit of a problem. In Japan, it's causing a bit of problem. Again, a great example of successful economies with relatively wealthy populations. And it's a problem because, they don't have the younger people to take over the jobs as the old ones pass on.
Speaking of the younger generation, and do you think, I just shift the conversation for a second. I've had this thought, and I don't think we've ever made a video about it, that we have this expectation that our kids' lifestyle should be better than our own. And so every generation going up says our lives should be better, lives should be, more prosperous, more wealth. Would it be a horrible thing, is I guess my point, if it leveled off or our kids didn't have as much wealth as we did, and if things didn't continue growing the way they were? Wouldn't there still be food on the table? Wouldn't there still be a roof over the head? Maybe they wouldn't be able to have, finance the new, $500 a month car, which is now, I don't know if you read this, but Equifax just put out the average car payment's now $503 a month. They wouldn't have the 4,000 square foot house. They might have to settle for a 1,500 square foot house. Like all of that, is that really a bad thing if growth doesn't just continue exponentially as it has?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. And I think it depends on how you define your children being better off than you were.
Yeah.
So classically, that's been defined in a very consumerist point of view, right? So we as a culture in here in America are a consumerist society, and we tend to equate success and our children being better off with them having more stuff than we had.
Right.
And it's possible, but by that measure, that maybe our children won't have more stuff than we have. But I know, speaking for myself, I am busy eliminating as much stuff from my life as possible, and that's making my life better. My daughter, who's in the Peace Corps, has almost no stuff, but she has a wonderful life. She has a much better life than I had at her age, but with a lot less stuff. Another way to measure that is I look at my father as an example in his generation. If you were lucky in my parents' generation and maybe your grandparents' generation, you went to work for a company and you worked at that company for 40 years. And at the end of 40 years, you walked out with a pension and a gold watch. And that was success. That meant you had done better than your parents before you. And that was my dad's generation. In my generation, in my business career, I spent the bulk of it, not all of it, but the bulk of it in one field. But I worked for multiple companies in that field because for my generation, it became fashionable and it was seen as a good strategy to move from company to company. And if you stayed in one company for too long, you were seen as not being ambitious, and you tended not to make as much money because the company didn't tend to take care of you as well. They got, I guess, complacent in having you. So that was kind of my generation, one industry, but multiple companies and multiple jobs. I suspect for your generation, and even more so for my daughters, it's not only going to be multiple jobs, it's going to be multiple fields. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe that doesn't lead to a pension and a gold watch, but it seems to me it leads to a much better and more interesting and exciting life. I'm sure glad I didn't have to work in one company for 40 years. I'm glad I got to work in a variety of companies, but now I look at the opportunities in front of people who are in their 20s and 30s who are going to be working in multiple industries as well as multiple jobs and developing multiple skill sets. That might be hard for some people. I think it's enormously exciting and is a much improved over their parents' generation. So I guess it depends on how you define it.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just the mainstream media generally defines that success or that betterment as, consumer lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the traditional way.
Right. All right. Well, let's shift gears again and go to some questions. Let's start at the top here.
Start with the easy ones.
Yeah. What do you think about Wealthfront? That's a good question. I like that you can invest I like that you can invest a little bit, but no fees. So would you talk a little bit about Wealthfront? And Betterment is another similar, tech 2.0 investing for the next generation type company.
Well, I'm not familiar with Betterment or with Wealthfront rather. My understanding is that, as you just alluded to, that Wealthfront and Betterment are very, very similar kinds of.
I believe they are, yeah. Yeah.
And I am a little bit familiar with Betterment. In fact, I have a post on my blog about Betterment, and in that post, I recommend them. And I have an affiliate relationship with them. So my attitude, and I say this in my post, is that if you can read through my blog and read through the stock series and you are comfortable with it and you understand it, or by extension now, if you can read through my new book and you're comfortable with it, understand it, and if I've done my job, it should be easy to understand for just about everybody. Then I don't think you need a Betterment or a Wealthfront, quite honestly. I think you can go to Vanguard, which is what I recommend. And for less money in fees, you can buy the two funds that I recommend in an allocation that makes sense for you, which I talk about in the blog and in the book. And you're done. And it would be hard to make that easier. By the same token, if you don't want to read the book, if you don't want to read the stock series, or if you go through them and you say, I'm still not comfortable with this, then for a little bit more in fees, and I'm going to talk about Betterment, but I think this applies to Wealthfront, for a little bit more in fees, you can go to Betterment and you can have them do it for you. And the amount in fees is modest. It's certainly modest in compared to what advisors charge. It's modest in compared to what a lot of actively managed funds charge. And you can give them your goals and your parameters and what allocation you're comfortable with, and they'll do it for you, and they will maintain that allocation, and they'll do it automatically. And when I first wrote about them, and I wrote about them a couple of years ago, I opened an account to see what the experience was like, because I don't recommend anything on my blog that I don't have intimate knowledge with and great comfort in recommending. And I have to say the user experience with Betterment is pretty impressive. I mean, it is pretty cool in terms of the charts they provide, and they make it very easy. And so another area where they might be useful is for somebody who finds it challenging to save and challenging to actually put the money aside to invest. Betterment has a way of interfacing with their customers that encourages that behavior. And if in fact that works for you and you wind up investing more money by virtue of that, then the small extra fee they charge is well worth it. But my first choice is still investing is really simple if you understand a few key things, and there's no better way to do it than through Vanguard, no less expensive way.
Well, particularly if you are our age and you do subscribe to we have a 30-year at least investing timeline. So we're 100% invested in VTSAX. It can't get any easier for us. Then it automatically pulls out what we tell it to every month, and we never think about it. So anytime a friend just texted me and asked me about Acorn, the app, or any number of new apps that allow you to invest for free. My response is always, yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're just fine, but I don't understand how you could get any easier or any cheaper than Vanguard. And you do bring up a good point that you do have to come to the point where you've read up on the subject and you agree and understand why you're investing in index funds and why you're investing in a total stock market index if you choose, and then why Vanguard. So great points. Let's go to another question.
Before you go on, if I can just continue on that real quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
You are doing exactly what I would recommend for somebody your age and in your situation. You're doing exactly what I have my daughter doing. But the important thing is that you also understand why you're doing it. And it's important because when the market takes a plunge, and as you discussed in the video and I discussed in the book and the blog, the market routinely plunges. It's part of the process. It's important that you understand why you're 100% in VTSAX.
Right.
So you stay the course.
Exactly.
Okay.
Along those lines of, so for those that don't know, Betterment and Wealthfront and similar automatically do asset allocation for you based on what you tell them. So a question came up, is asset allocation the best way to address stock market volatility? And I'll let you answer that, but it is interesting that you ask that because I just got an email. We've been exchanging emails with someone who is invested in universal life insurance, and they were really sold on the cap, or on the market was limited to losing 3% a year and capped alternatively at 14%. And so we were able to, put together a spreadsheet and show that over the last 40 years, he's putting around $700,000 on the table by having that peace of mind, knowing that he couldn't lose any more than 3% in a year. So we won't get into the universal life and whole life insurance in general, but just would you address that? Because that's what I told him, the stock market volatility. You address that by changing your asset allocation between stocks and bonds. So for someone our age, you recommend 100% stocks. At what point do you start? Does that change for you? And we do have a video, I believe it's episode 7, will address this, but we'll go ahead and if you want to touch on it for a second now, that'd be great.
We can talk about now. Well, first of all, on the universal life thing, the other thing is the enormous fees that are involved, those kinds of things.
Well, it was interesting. They were buried. I looked through, and that's what they're very good at, is they're hiding those fees. But yes. It's a whole nother video. In fact, I'm actually thinking about emailing him and asking if we could do a video on the topic, because it was really interesting to actually see the contract in front of me. But go ahead with stocks and bonds.
Okay. So in the book and on the blog, I talk about not so much your age, but where you are in your money life cycle. And I think of it in terms of your wealth building phase and your wealth preservation phase. So your wealth building phase is just what it sounds like, is when you are accumulating your wealth and you are adding new money to your investments and you're growing your pot. And then the wealth preservation phase comes when you are relying on your investments to support you, okay? So stocks provide the best possible return, but they are also very volatile. Bonds provide a much lower return, but they smooth the ride. So if you want to decrease, and it's not a matter of risk, and this is an important distinction, it's a matter of volatility. So if you want to decrease the volatility of it being invested in stocks, then you add bonds. And the more bonds you add, the lower the volatility, but you are also hurting your long-term performance. Now, if you are working, whether you're young or not, if you're working and you anticipate continuing to work into the immediate future, you are investing, if you're taking part of your earned income and you are pouring it into your investments, that new invested money serves the role of smoothing the ride. Because when you're doing that, you're actually, if you're smart, you're almost hoping the stock market will drop, because that new money you invest you'll be buying things at bargain rates on sale, so to speak. In fact, I kind of jokingly say, if you're in the wealth building phase, if you're young or even not so young, you're working, you're pouring money into your investments, the best thing that could happen to you is a market crash. I mean, 2008 is what everybody who is currently pouring money into in the early stages, that's what you should be hoping for. And you should hope that now, of course, the market's not going to do this, by the way, but you should hope the market stays low. And then when you have to shift to living on your investments, to your wealth preservation stage, that's when you want the market to skyrocket. So when you stop having earned income, either because, and this doesn't happen necessarily by age, although it can. A lot of people listening to this are probably planning to retire early. Maybe they already have. So if you retire early, even if you're 35, you're now in the wealth preservation stage.
Right.
You're going to want something to replace that earned income and to smooth the ride, and that's where bonds can play a role. Let's say you retire at 35 as an early retiree, and at 45, you find some really cool activity that's generating income again. Well, you might shift back to the wealth building phase, and you have earned income, and so maybe you move out of bonds, and so it's a matter not so much of age, it's a matter of what tool do you have available to smooth the ride of your stocks. And if you have earned income, as you two do, then I don't think you need bonds. The earned income and the portion of that you're investing smooths the ride. But if you decide you're not going to work for a while, whether you're your age or you're my age, then you might want to look at bonds to play that role.
I really like that, because the rule of thumb, on any mainstream blog or whatever, is subtract your age from 40, or I think it is. And
I forget what it is.
Yeah, whatever it is. People like rules of thumb, but the problem is they don't apply to everyone. But that is a pretty simple rule of thumb. If you're in your wealth building phase, you necessarily need bonds. If you're in your wealth preservation stage, and you do. So I really like that a lot. So thank you.
This goes back to what you were talking about with, are your children going to be better off than you are? Are you better off than your parents? Those rules of thumb came from the idea of my father's generation, that you got a job with a company if you were lucky and you worked for 40 years and then you stepped off the train. Well, then that rule of thumb begins to make sense.
Right.
But the cool thing, I think, for young people today, and for my daughter, is that's not the way it works anymore. You'll be getting on and off that work train multiple times during your working life.
Right.
You may be taking multiple sabbaticals. I think that makes for a much more dynamic and interesting life, but it also kind of tosses the old rule of thumb into the trash heap.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we were at 30 minutes now, so let's open up to just general Q&A. So you can start sending those in now, but while we're waiting for those, someone asked, can you speak on the subject of 12% return in today's market? So I guess rephrasing that question, and this will just have to be for you personally, because you don't want to say something that, is, have to stick to, but what do you use as a rule of thumb for what you can expect the market to return? Or what do you tell your daughter over the next 40 years?
Well, it's an interesting issue, because when I was writing the book, and in the book I do several what if scenarios, and I go to a variety of different calculators depending on what I'm illustrating to run those scenarios. And whenever you're using a calculator, you have to plug in certain parameters, and one of those frequently is, what is your expected rate of return? And one of the things that I wanted to illustrate, which I do in the book, is what was the rate of return over the 40 years that I've been investing. I started basically in 1975, so through the end of last year. And I didn't really know what the answer to that was, and I went to one of these calculators, and to my amazement, because as we talked about earlier, this was a pretty rugged 40 years in terms of some of the financial economic challenges. To my amazement, the return is actually just under 12%.
Yeah.
And that sat me back in my chair, and it created quite a dilemma for me, because I don't feel comfortable then, and I don't feel comfortable now, suggesting to anybody that they should expect 12% returns for the next 40 years. It's possible, but I would not base my financial well-being on such a thing. And yet that was what the real number was. So I was faced with a dilemma. I could pick a different period of time. If I picked the period of time from, say, 1980 to 1995, which I think I ran, the return's like 18% a year.
Right.
If I pick a period of time from 2000 to 2010, I think it was a -3. So the period of time you select to measure can make a huge difference. So the 40 years I happen to be looking at, that I liked because it represented my own experience, provided a bit of a dilemma for myself. And the way I resolved it for the book is I explained this early on in the chapter in some detail as to why this 12% is the number and what the enormous caveats of it are. Now, what do I use projecting forward? I really don't. I mean, you can plug in whatever you want, and it's fun to play with, but none of us sitting here know what the next 40 years is going to present. So whatever return that you decide to project is almost by definition going to be wrong.
Right.
So it's a guess. And I would never suggest it. And this is one of the problems I have with calculators. And I understand that people want something definitive. They want to know, if I do this, will I get this? And the problem is we just don't know. You know, you have to guess, what is inflation going to be? Well, we don't know what inflation is going to be. What are stock returns going to be? Well, we don't really know. We can look at history and we can put in some variations and you can get a pretty good idea. So that's what I would suggest is You know that it was 12% over the last 40 years. I'm certainly too conservative to be comfortable using that going forward. So what do you put in, 7, 8?
Yeah.
And understanding that that may well be low.
Yeah.
And then you can look and say, well, what if it's only 4? And you can run the numbers and see what that looks like. And then you can say, well, what if it is 12? And you can run the numbers and see what that looks like. But understanding that no matter which of those you do or how many of those you do, you're projecting the future. And by definition, you're going to be wrong.
Right. All right. One last finance question. Then we have a couple for like build questions. Your thoughts on investing domestically versus internationally? And actually, you have an interesting opinion on this. I'm excited to hear it again.
Well, I guess I'm a little bit infamous for not recommending investing in international funds. Almost every other person that I'm aware of out there who is making portfolio suggestions does suggest investing in international. And I don't. And I don't for a couple of reasons. Number one is we've got it covered. If you're in VTSAX, which is Vanguard's Total Stock Market Index Fund, and the fund that I recommend, it's the fund that I'm in, it's the fund that I have my daughter in, you own, as part of that fund, the 500 largest companies in the United States. And almost all of those are international businesses. Many of them actually generate the largest percentage of their revenue and their profits internationally. So if you are investing in the total stock market fund for the United States, you already are having tremendous international exposure. Plus, you have an international exposure into companies that have not perfect accounting standards and transparency, but certainly the best in the world. Plus the currency risk of buying stocks internationally, because you're going to be, of course, they're traded in their local currency. So there is a currency risk between the US dollar and whatever that currency is. All of that is handled by the companies who are operating in those countries. So to me, you already have international exposure in those big US companies, and you have it without the currency risk and without the transparency risk. So you are participating in the world market, which is what you really want. Now, having said all of that, look at this.
I can't see him yet.
They just brought their little baby onto the screen that I'm looking at, so now I'm distracted. I guess everybody's looking at me, which is a real mistake. There is something much, much cuter to be looked at. But anyway, having said all that, if somebody said, I really want to invest internationally, I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't think it's necessary. Of course, international funds are a little more expensive. The expense ratios are a little higher because they're more expensive to operate. I don't feel a need. I don't do it. I don't recommend it. But it's not one of those things that I would say you're making a mistake that will severely damage your financial future, right, if that's what you're comfortable doing.
And when I heard that, something clicked. I was like, I just had never thought of having. Oh, and someone asked, "Why don't you do more videos with Hudson?" Hudson was outside with my parents, so here's Hudson. Say hi.
Hudson, you have a bright future. You're going to do so much better than your parents.
Exactly. Yeah. So when I heard that, that was a light bulb moment for me. So I always appreciated your thoughts on that. That by buying domestic stock, you're also very much exposed internationally. So let's wrap this up. I just wanted, there was one comment I wanted to say to you. Switched to VTSAX last week. Big thank you to Jim for teaching me that on his blog. The Orange Elephant said that. Oh, someone asked about the Apple Watch stand. Doing a follow-up on that. We were going to put a LED light in that, and it's at my friend's house that we built it for, and he uses it every day, and so we just have never gotten around to it. He's happy with it how it is, so maybe one day we'll do that. Any comments for Jim? Came across Jim from Mr. Money Mustache. like him. Okay, I think. Oh, real quick, might as well do one last one because it's a good question. Any advice on investing in REITs, real estate stocks? Asking specifically about self-storage stocks, and then we will wrap it up. I didn't know self-storage stocks existed, but real quick, your thoughts on REITs?
My thoughts on self-storage stocks.
Yeah.
That's really two questions. So let's start with the self-storage stocks. I don't recommend investing in individual stocks to begin with. It's just too hard, and there's nobody has been proven to be able to do it reliably over time with great success. And on the rare occasion somebody is, and Warren Buffett is the obvious example. Well, the reason Warren Buffett is famous is because he's able to do something, that is, pick individual stocks, that is vanishingly difficult to do. So I wouldn't be looking at any individual stocks, and by definition, that includes self-storage stocks. I used to, when I first started writing the blog, actually, I did recommend three funds. Of course, there's VTSAX, which is the stocks, and then if you want to need bonds, there's VBTLX for the bonds. And then I forget the ticker for it, but there was Vanguard's index REIT fund. Mm-hmm. And I owned the index REIT fund at the time with the idea that it would be a good inflation hedge. And of course, it threw off a pretty good dividend, and that's a nice little fringe benefit, but mostly as an inflation hedge. But it turns out that as I did more research into it, it's not a bad inflation hedge, but it's no better than ordinary stocks. And when you own VTSAX, you own virtually every stock in the US market, and that includes the REITs. So I don't own as many REITs as I do because I don't own the specific REIT fund, but I still own some of them, and I just don't feel the need to overweight by having a fund devoted to them.
Great answer. I think we will let that be the end. So we want to thank Jim for being on with us tonight. We discussed what kind of schedule we want to do these on, and we didn't come up with anything. So we're going to post a few more videos from the stock series, and we'll see what kind of questions. If something comes up again and again and again, we'll make sure that we do another Q&A. I'd love to do at least one or two more, maybe more with you before we end the stock series. So hopefully you enjoyed it enough that you'd like to come back. And then we'll go from there.
Well, this one's been a lot of fun, and I would be happy to do it again. And as I say, we'll kind of figure out what the schedule is and see what kind of interest there is out there. And if there are more coming, then I'm all for it.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, guys, for watching. Again, Stock Series is our last video that we posted. We'll leave a link in the description for this video if you want to watch that playlist from beginning to end. And thanks for watching. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
See you next time.
Bye.